Do you want to turn off mob spawning and prevent all mobs from spawning in your survival worlds? Well, mob switches let you control how and where mobs spawn without using peaceful mode, cheats, or any commands. This all works in pure survival. Mob switches can be very useful, allowing you to stop all mob spawns in and around your base for a completely peaceful area. They also let you turn off mob spawning while building complex farms, and even spawn-proof areas directly around your farms without impacting the rates. There's two main types of mob switches. A local mob switch prevents all mob spawning in the local area, great for bases and spawn proofing around your mob farms, but there's also global mob switches that prevent all mob spawning in all dimensions. Keep in mind that mob switches only affect naturally spawned mobs, so they don't affect spawner farms, portal gold farms, villager breeders, etc. Mob switches basically work by getting a pile of mobs that can't despawn, which then fills up the mob cap, and if the mob cap is full, nothing new will spawn. It sounds simple, but there's a lot of deeper game mechanics that you'll need to know to fully take advantage of this tech. Just to prove that this does actually work, we have our 16 mobs and boats right here and a couple of chickens, and that's going to prevent everything in a 9x9 area from spawning. So if you look around, you're not going to see any mobs whatsoever. And then if we just walk off over here in the distance, far away from that mob switch, then as you can see, we're going to get mobs to spawn. So this is what a local mob switch looks like. It's just 16 mobs, and we can get these really easily using the new oozing potion. This will prevent all cave spawns in the area. So you heard that right. If you want to make your entire nether hub or farming area super peaceful while you're building, then all you need is these couple slimes and some boats. A local mob switch prevents all mob spawning in a 9x9 chunk area or a 144x144 area. And you can have multiple of them to get an even larger area. A global mob switch is much easier. You just get a pile of 200 mobs, like 200 chickens, into a little area. So as long as this is in loaded chunks, nothing is going to spawn in the overworld, the nether, or the end dimension. So the global mob cap is really easy to understand. Minecraft keeps track of and counts every mob that is loaded, and once that number reaches 200, it stops spawning more mobs. So while it's really easy to set up and understand, it's pretty much only useful on multiplayer worlds and technical places where everyone is okay with you turning off the mob spawning. There are a bunch of mobs that do not affect the global cap, meaning that you can have basically as many as you want and it's not going to affect mob spawning. Breeding up cats or dogs also fills up the global cap, so if you have 200 dogs or 200 cats, bam, you got yourself a global mob cap filler. So that's the basics for how mob switches work, and if you just want to do a really simple stop all mobs from spawning in your one area, then you can probably just skip to the tutorial. However, there's a lot of deeper game mechanics that you should probably know before you dive into making mob switches, and I think you'll find it interesting. So global mob switches are really easy to build and understand, but local mob switches have quite a few more mechanics to them, so let's jump into it. For this demonstration, I'm going to use these little chunk grids right here. So each one of these blocks and these little mock-ups represents a 16x16 chunk of the Minecraft world, which is this size area. So as you can see, this little demonstration right here is a fairly large area. This is the scale. Everything inside of the yellow line is the Sim 4 simulation distance, and all these chunks are loaded around the player all the time on Sim 4. So let's talk about density checks. Density checks are a thing that the game does to make sure it's not spawning too many mobs in one area. So let's pretend that we have a mob trying to spawn in our very center chunk. Not only is it going to check the entire loaded area to make sure that the mob cap is not full, it's actually going to check some unloaded chunks around the area as well. It's checking a 9x9 chunk area, meaning that it's going beyond our simulation distance and reading mobs in unloaded chunks. So as you can see, it's going to be reading mobs in that entire 9x9 area to make sure that the mob cap is not full, and if the mob cap is not full, then bam, you will have a mob spawn. Now in a typical Minecraft world, you're not really going to have that many hostile mobs or really anything in unloaded chunks because they're going to despawn before they get unloaded. However, if we go ahead and we make some mobs persistent, like name tag them, then they're going to be a persistent mob and they will be picked up by that density check. So this means that we can have a bunch of mobs off in unloaded chunks somewhere, and that will actually prevent mobs from spawning in our loaded area as long as they're within 9 chunks of this creeper over here. So the density check is why our split density mob farms have more than 4 chunks in between them. We can have a mob spawn right here, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 chunks between them, and another mob farm over here, and bam, the density checks for both of those do not interact with each other, meaning that we essentially get double the mob cap and double the capacity of our farm. The density check is just half the battle because you also need to fill up the mob cap as well. Here's a simplified graph of the mob caps of Bedrock Edition. Now, generally, your mob cap is going to be 4, 8, or 16, depending on what you're trying to fill up. This video is just going to focus on passive and hostile mob caps, but there's other less important ones that you can see on the graph here. If you want to know more about this stuff, the Minecraft Wiki actually has a great breakdown of more mob spawning information that you might find fascinating. There's also different versions of the same mob cap. So for instance, there's a surface mob cap. This means that the block has no solid blocks above it. It's basically got direct sky access. So passive animals are basically always a surface spawn, and then hostile mobs can be a surface spawn if there's nothing above them. Now, there's also cave spawns. These are things that spawn underground or with a solid block above them. So there's a surface hostile mob cap, and then there's a cave hostile mob cap, and you need to fill up both of those separately if you don't want any hostile mobs to spawn. So the overworld has surface and cave spawning, the nether only has cave spawning, and the end dimension only has surface spawning. So keep that in mind when you're building mob switches in different dimensions. So we can easily fill up the hostile mob cave cap just by using these couple slimes right here, so nothing is going to spawn in the caves below us, and if we put this in the nether, then basically no hostile mobs would spawn in the nether. If you want to fill up the surface hostile mob cap, that one's a bit more complicated. You're going to have to go wild harvest some naturally spawned mobs and then make them persistent. So I got 8 guys in this little chamber right here, meaning that the surface cap is completely full and nothing will spawn on the surface. And what I mean by wild harvest is literally go find some naturally spawned mobs like on the surface somewhere and then capture them. Typically, zombies are going to be the easiest one to work with. Another interesting mechanic of Bedrock Edition is that mobs from mob spawners actually count towards the surface cap. So if you have yourself a zombie or other spawner on the ground, you can simply use this spawner to get yourself some guys, make them persistent, and that will actually fill up the surface cap. If I find an easier way to fill up the surface hostile cap, I'll let you guys know in the pinned comment below. Filling up the surface passive cap in the overworld is really easy. All you need to do is wild harvest 4 animals and make them persistent. If you want to fill up the cave passive mob cap for the nether, that's really easy. You can just use chicken eggs for that, and all you need is 4 chickens. There's also all the other little mob caps like aquatic mobs, ambient, and pillager, but we won't be getting into that here. Basically, if you want to turn off that type of mob spawning with a local switch, you need to get that number of mobs and make them persistent. When making a local mob switch, there's several different ways to make your mob persistent. That way it doesn't despawn when you leave the area. You can either name tag the mob, which is the easiest one. You can also make them hold something or wear something. And if you're working with passive mobs, simply luring the mob works. You can also breed them or name tag them as well. Any method of making your mob persistent is perfectly fine. As long as they don't despawn when you leave the area, you are good to go. So now you should understand how local mob switches work, but we can also combine these and use multiple switches for some really cool use cases. So don't be freaked out quite yet. Basically, what this is representing is we have 4 piles of persistent mobs. Now, these ones are going to be filling up the mob cap an entire 9 by 9 chunk area. So this means that you would be standing right about in the center. This is where your base would be, or your mob farm, or whatever you want. And as you see, this entire area around you would be completely spawn-proofed just by having 4 little piles of mobs. And those guys are actually out in unloaded chunks, so they're not being laggy. And they're also not filling up the global mob cap either. So if you wanted to make it just an utterly massive area around you completely peaceful, then this is where you would put your mob switches. Of course, it's not necessary to have 4 of them for this huge zone, but maybe this would be good for like a shopping district or a very large nether hub, for example. Now, if you offset your little mob switches by 1 chunk, as you can see, these are not actually lined up with one another, then you can create a very small zone right in the very center where mobs are allowed to spawn. So these guys are more than 9 chunks away from all of our mob switches, meaning that you could have like a witch hut right there or some other type of mob farm, and they would not be impacted by any of the mob switches. However, nothing would be able to spawn around that farm, so you would not need to spawn proof anything, basically. And of course, you can just keep offsetting your little mob switches. So these guys are offset by 2 chunks, which gives us a 2x2 area in the center there where mobs can spawn. And these guys are offset by 3 chunks, which gives us a 3x3 chunk area in the very middle. So these layouts are incredibly useful in a variety of situations, but especially in the Nether, where spawn proofing is incredibly slow and tiresome. You can put just 4 little patches of mobs all around your mob farm in the Nether. Bam, your mob farm will work perfectly at full capacity, but you don't need to spawn proof any of the terrain around it, saving you hours or weeks of your life. Now, the only caveat to this kind of system is that these mobs do have to be loaded at one point or another. So if you restart the server or if you log out of the game or something, you will have to actually travel around a little bit to make sure that these mobs do get loaded. But that means that you can go back and stand in your center AFK area. These guys will be back in unloaded chunks, but because they were loaded previously, the density checks will pick them up. So if you make this system and for some reason mobs are still spawning, just make sure to walk around and load in your mob switches. Now, I know that these layouts are going to be kind of difficult for you to set up in survival mode, so what I would recommend that you do is you go to the website chunkbase.com, and then you just scroll down to the bottom here and select the grid lines option. This will actually show you all the chunk borders in your world, so you would select where your center point is going to be, either your AFK spot or your farm or something, and then you can simply count out by the number of chunks, and this will tell you where you need to put your mob switch. So we know that we need one like over here, for example. And then as you can see in the bottom left over there, that shows you the exact coordinates where you need to put your mobs. So you can use this to really easily build your mob switches without having to count chunks in game. And by the way, Chunkbase also shows you where your mob spawners are, and basically every other structure as well. So you can use this to easily fill up your surface mob cap. So to build yourself a global mob switch, it's really easy. You're going to need all the materials in this chest right here, including yourself a bunch of eggs. I'd highly recommend that you have this thing chunk aligned. That way it's not on a chunk border or something weird, because this is going to be a lot of chickens. So start off with a chest in the ground, hopper pointing into it, and a carpet above that. And then we're simply going to surround this entire thing in a couple layers of glass, including the corner blocks, that way nothing glitches out. So just a little container like that, and then 3 glass on the side right here. Go ahead and put in yourself a dispenser facing to the side, and then 1 more glass on top like so. Now grab yourself a couple of hoppers, point it into the side of that, the top, and then the side of that one. We're gonna have a double chest up here for you to load this thing up with eggs, so just put as many eggs in there as you possibly can. So go to the back side of your dispenser. We're gonna place out a couple of blocks right here, a block up, and then a little platform of blocks that looks like this, and a couple more right there. So it should be this general shape. So now we need a comparator, a repeater, a comparator on subtract mode right there, 2 pieces of redstone dust, and then a repeater going into there. That is going to shoot all your eggs, and then you just need to sit here and watch this and count. So we got like 6 in there right now. That's 7, 8, 9, and I think you kind of get the point. If this thing is too fast for you to count, then you can put this repeater right here on 2 ticks, and that'll make it fire a little bit slower for you. You don't need an exact count. It can be over 200. That's fine. And of course, you can just put a lever right there to manually churn it off. So once these guys grow up into adult chickens, they're going to start laying their own eggs, which you can use to restock this thing, of course, and help you get to 200 chickens. But once you have 200 chickens in there, you're going to need to dispose of those eggs. So I would go ahead and build this exact same circuit that's up here right down beneath this thing. So once you got your 200 chickens in there, you can tear down this circuit that's on the side over here, remove this block and your dispenser and all of that stuff, and then basically just seal this up right here, because you'll never need to touch those chickens again. You can reuse those materials that were just broke to build up yourself the comparator clock down here, and then anytime these guys lay an egg, that's going to go straight into your hopper, and you can just shoot that straight into some lava. Now, I would recommend that you actually use a dropper right here instead of a dispenser, because as you can see, this one's actually hatching chickens into the lava, which just seems a little bit cruel. For the local mob switches, it's actually really easy. So there's 4 main types that you'll need to know how to build, one of which I have a really easy build to show you for. So, of course, there is the 2 passive caps. To fill the surface passive cap, you just need to get 4 wild animals and make them persistent. To fill the cave passive cap, you could just use some chicken eggs. It's super easy. To fill the surface hostile mob cap, you'll have to actually go wild harvest some mobs and then make those guys persistent. But for the cave hostile mob cap, we can actually just use some oozing potions to incredibly easily get all 16 of those mobs. And that's what I'll be showing you how to build right now. You're going to need all these materials in my inventory. You're going to need 8 boats, you're going to need an oozing potion, a regular harming potion, 6 to 8 different name tags depending on your luck, and 4 armor stands. These are all consumable items. You'll need all of these materials for every single mob switch that you build. You'll also be needing 24 walls, a dispenser, and a button, and you can reuse these materials and use them for multiple different mob switches. And you also want to wear some armor for this, since you will be getting hit by the slimes. Now, when it comes to actually choosing your build area, if you're just going to be building one of these things, then I'd recommend that you put it like in the very center of your base area or your nether hub or whatever. That way it gets maximum coverage of the area. But if you're going to be building multiple of those, then please reference the earlier parts of the video and chunk base and all that. Anyway, you want to make sure that you build your mob switch inside of one chunk, since that's kind of how this entire thing operates. So it can go anywhere inside the chunk, doesn't really matter. We're just going to start off by placing in a dispenser right here and then break out a block over here for a button. We're going to go ahead and put ourselves a harming potion in there and then get ourselves in some walls. We're going to build up 3 layers of walls going all the way around this thing. This will contain all of your medium slimes to make sure that they do not get out of here. If you use solid blocks, they will escape. So now you need to place in 4 armor stands. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to go ahead and throw an oozing potion at that wall right there. It should hit those armor stands through the wall. Press the button to release the harming potion to kill the armor stands, and as you can see, now we have some medium slimes in there. Now, this is where you're going to need to get all of your boats and your name tags. So you need to break out the corners of these things right here, only the corners, and do not hit your slimes. So we're going to place down a boat on each corner and just kind of nudge that thing in there. So we should get 2 slimes per boat. Now, these guys will deal damage to you when you actually touch them, so that's why you need to wear armor and stuff. You can also get a shield if you want to. So we're basically just going to nudge that right into the corner until you get 2 slimes in there. If you use 4 armor stands, there's guaranteed going to be 8 of these medium slimes. So do this on each side. Okay, now we have all of our slimes and all of our boats, and you can actually go ahead and tear down this entire structure and remove all your stuff if you want to. Now, I would recommend that you start off by name tagging 6 of these medium slimes. You do not need to name tag the extra 2. These ones are spares. So these are the 6 slimes that we've name tagged. We're going to place down the 4 extra boats that we have in this area, just kind of around these guys. And now that these ones are name tagged, when we kill them, the small ones will also be persistent. You're not going to see the names on them, but they will not despawn. So go ahead and break 6 of these slimes, and then if you're lucky, you should have 16 or more baby slimes. Now, of course, when you're in survival, they're all going to be attracted to you, so you can simply walk around a little bit and make sure that all of your boats get filled up with these baby slimes. Now, you need 8 boats that are completely full of your baby slimes, and as you can see, we have 8 of them, meaning that we have 16 of these baby slimes, and we actually have a couple left over, so we do not need either of these 2 guys, and we also do not need these slimes over here. Now, again, these ones are not name tagged, so the babies are not going to be persistent, so just go ahead and get the boat and kill all these extra ones. Now, if you broke your 6 main slimes that you name tagged and you did not get 16 babies, then that's when you would need to go ahead and name tag your other guy and then break him and see if you get enough slimes to fill up all 8 of your boats. And as you can see, that's basically all we need to do. As long as you don't have any, like, iron golems in the area, these guys are not going to get attacked by anything. They're not going to despawn. We have them inside the boats, so that way they're not jumping around and being a noisy annoyance. And as long as they're all within one chunk, that is going to fill up the hostile cave cap. So to recap, we have our 16 slimes and boats. That is going to fill the cave hostile cap. And then we also got our 8, zombies or whatever surface mobs that are persistent. That's going to fill up the surface hostile cap. And then we also got our 4 passive mobs, and that's going to fill up the passive cap. So this is essentially going to stop all major mob spawning within a 9x9 chunk area, except for like bats and a couple other aquatic mobs and things like that. But of course, if you want to stop that kind of mob spawning, you can simply go ahead and collect those mobs as well. Also, if you want to move around these boats a little bit easier, you can just simply click on them with a lead, and then you can kind of like pile them up in the corner or something. So a complete nether mob switch would look something like this. We got our 8 boats full of slimes, and then we simply got our 4 chickens from the eggs, and that's going to prevent everything in a 9x9 chunk area from spawning. Again, there's no surface spawns in the nether, so you don't need to worry about that at all. Drop a like, subscribe, and share this video around so that other people can use this incredible tech. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys down in the comments and in the next one.